things, and also think it's a best practice. It's something that we can all strive for. So that's the angle I come towards this. I think that making web content should make the best web content possible. That's really where I come to this. I'm by no means an expert. I've got a lot of experience. Hopefully I can share that with some experience. First, I want to see who's in the room. So by a show of hands, you can answer some of these questions here. Do you know what that little blue flippy arrow at the top is? Anyone? Okay, so we got, I'd say 75% know that that's the tool reset arrow, top the left of Sakai. And you figure that one out, watershed moment. You've been to the Apereo conference before. So good chunk of you have. Do you know what A11Y stands for? Okay, more on that in a second. The hashtag A11Y. Developers. Any developers in the room? Teachers? People in support roles? Okay, so we got teachers and people in support roles. That's good to know. As far as that A11Y, it's a hashtag on many things for accessibility. Dropping 11 letters from accessibility, then you get A11Y. Sometimes it's called ALI, because the ones look like L's, but the A11Y is the hashtag for accessibility, news, interest. A lot of stuff in the Sakai code base will get the short note of A11Y to represent accessibility. So it's a little tag and a shorthand for accessibility. Now you know. Okay, so I gotta get a sense of what the status of accessibility is at your institution organization. So wherever place makes sense, could you please let me know? So I've got a kind of graduated set of questions here. Put your hand up if this describes you and your organization and their relationship to accessibility. So it's a good idea. I don't think this is most hands. It would be in the room if it wasn't the good. A legal requirement higher than the Americans with Disabilities Act. Take a chunk here. Interesting. Has your organization set a higher standard than the legal requirement? So if you've taken the legal requirement you have and said this is how we're going to further define it. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Are you actively working towards a higher standard? People, thank you. And that's my next slide. So thanks again for that insight. So our role in the accessibility working group is we do accessibility consulting to the Sakai community. We periodically perform audits of Sakai accessibility review. It's something that we haven't had the resources to do a lot of lately. We're working to address that. Like many projects in Sakai, resources are always tight. We try to identify a set of standards to have Sakai meet, which is WCAG 2 level AA. More on that in a second. And the ARIA standards. We track accessibility issues, and we take in accessibility issues. So we write JIRAs, if you know what a JIRA is, so that developers can address and resolve issues. We review JIRAs, add clarity, and hopefully do some work in fixing them. And we'll take in accessibility issue reports in any format they come in. You can email me, tweet me, join the mailing list, a whole bunch of options to reporting an accessibility issue. If there's a chance that this is something that's irrelevant or local, we'd love to hear it anyway, just to make sure it isn't. So, love to hear about the accessibility issues and what we can do to work towards resolving them and documenting them. There's a barrier being removed. In a large community around the world, got mail, of people volunteering their time or being developing on behalf of their institution, but still a very small community. In fact, lately, that's the direction of our community right there. We've been losing a lot of resources, so if you are someone who is interested in working with accessibility on the web, or you know someone that works in the area that might be able to add some insight, code, or have no idea what code looks like, we'd love to hear from them on the mailing list or every other Thursday conference call. Again, you don't have to be too technical to join in. We'd love to get insight from anyone. If you have an accessibility, if you are an accessibility person or know of the accessibility person about web stuff at your institution, even if you're not related to Sakai, we'd love to hear from you, build our community. Here's our core team right now. I'll just thank Joe, Neil, and Gonzalo for being the core team with our working group. And all that said, Sakai does a pretty good job with accessibility today. The portal, the tool that everything wraps around all the site tools, is very accessible. It uses important definitions and accessibility keys. Another key accessibility topics. Our area of focus is smoothing off some rough edges around Sakai, bringing in new tools like sign up and other tools that are in Sakai 10 and giving them the attention they need. And we're moving into helping people who create content in the LMS to make more accessible content, which is what I want to focus on today. So, familiar with WCAG2? Seen it before? Heard Ian say WCAG2 and reference the feedwork on the first day. I say WCAG2, others say WCAG. I find WCAG, we let you know there's an acronym involved, but it's the World Wide Web Consortium's Accessibility Guidelines #2. And ideally, if you're one of those individuals who work or operate inside a legal jurisdiction that has an accessibility standard, hopefully it's a WCAG2. American Disability Act Section 508 is a good but low standard. WCAG2 is a very good standard and an international one. In Ontario, Canada, we adopted the WCAG2 as our legal requirements for accessible content across a different number of sectors, graduated. I know specifically that California was one of the first areas to adopt WCAG2 right into their state standards. I think it makes a lot of sense to use this global standard to bring it locally, especially when people are trying to make decisions about what's appropriate for their institution. Any questions about what I've said so far? So WCAG operates under the POUR principle. So this is a really simple way to think about, is something accessible? We'll talk more about standards and items and best practices. But POUR breaks it down to, is it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust? These are principles of web content that will make them accessible, but will also give you great SEO, be super long, have great longevity, be great standards-based content. So this isn't just about accessibility. If you can make something that fits into this core principle, it has all kinds of other positive benefits to it. When we work inside an LMS, that search engine optimization isn't as big of a deal, but it's often an easy way of trying to convince someone to make their content more accessible, is that Google loves accessible content because it makes sense to machines is a big part of making accessible content. So perceivable, information must be presented to users in a way they can perceive. That's often comes down to issues about color contrast, to making things that can be interpreted by a computer. A picture of a newspaper article can't be read by a screen reader, but the text from that article in actual letters and ASCII code could be. It's a difference right there. Something that's perceivable versus imperceivable. Operable. User interface components can be navigated. The structure is operable, makes sense. You could lay things out on the page in a way that visually they seem like they're associated, but if you don't do the related structural decisions in the document you created, then a screen reader or other interface software or device could have trouble navigating something that seems visually side by side, maybe actually technically 2 or 3 columns, and someone has to go up and down and back and forth. And if you can't see it, then that's a significant challenge. Understandable. Information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable, structure elements used in a meaningful way. So clear content. when it's a list, use your list markup. When it's when you're using something to lay out information, make sure that that layout decision you made doesn't have some other prior significance. So using spaces to lay things out is probably a bad idea. We're all well aware of this by now. That's an example of something that would confuse a screen reader or other text. Similarly, images of layout and text, images of text and all those kinds of things that aren't the original artifact can be confusing. And robust. Content must be robust enough so that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of technologies, including assistive technologies. Robust content also has the benefit of being good on mobile platforms and other new and emerging technologies. So that's what WCAG recommends. This is a table that I often show to instructors when they're creating content as hopefully a simpler way to make decisions about the kind of content you might want to add to an LMS or similar space. So here we have a kind of unacceptable to best practices of creating content. Unacceptable, scanning text. So if you scan text and turn it into an image, it's lost that meaning, that textual meaning. It's now, there's no difference between a journal article that's been scanned and a picture about an elephant and a picture of an elephant. The screen reader thinks it's a picture. That's all it knows. It doesn't know that the journal article about the elephant actually has words in it. It just knows it's a picture. So if you can avoid those kind of poor practices, similarly, posting content in the web in formats not intended for the web tends to be less than accessible. So things like posting content in an Office suite, well, you can make accessible Office documents and similar technologies. They do have the means to set that up. It's not as likely, and that modality shift can be very difficult for someone that doesn't perceive all the changes happening in front of them. So if clicking on the Word document means that a Word document or Microsoft Word opens in a new window, that shift of interface can be very challenging for someone trying to get back to where they started from, just because they clicked enter on a link to find out they're now in a whole separate tool. But nonetheless, better than over here. PDFs have proven more accessible than most documents, and usually a place where you can author content can be exported in the PDF. Make sure you're using a mature tool, a tool that knows what it's doing. You're not hitting print, scanning it into the PDF, and then putting it back on the web. I've seen that happen. If you're using a direct PDF export or something more sophisticated, that should work well. One challenge with things like PDF is it can use simple OCR. I know what OCR is. Okay. And if there's things like columns in a document, the OCR can make the mistake of reading through the columns horizontally. So if you're not using a more sophisticated PDF tool, that can be an issue. But almost always the best choice is using the CKEditor in Sakai. Then you're creating HTML content natively, and you've got the structural tools to help you make meaningful content as well. But always on this scale here, if you can make content in an HTML editor, you're going to make robust content. You're going to make content that's more likely to be accessible to your ultimate user. Any questions about things that might not be on here that you're wondering where it was fit? Yeah.
This might be a stupid question, but do you have to know HTML to create HTML?
You don't. So whenever you do,
type it in or copy it?
whenever you add web page and resources, you get the CKEditor. It's making an HTML page for you. And if you're going to copy in from Word, if you use the Word paste and do a couple little extra steps to verify it's doing what you think what it should do, which I'll get to in a second, you can have a pretty high reliability that's accessible content. At the very least, making a good effort. So Sakai CLE focuses on areas of navigation and description of what's on the page. Everyone have a sense of what an alt tag would be in the web, custom word, head nods. Thank you for the hand. So alternative description of the image. Interesting about alt tags, it's more of an art than a science because you have to describe what's in the image in a way it's meaningful for something that could be very visual, a chart, a joke. That can be challenging with the alt tag. So I will acknowledge it's an art, not a science. But I'll further add that if things are decorative, almost every user of a screen reading software would much rather you leave that alt tag blank. They don't want to hear that there's a garnish on the right or a logo up here. That's just more noise as they move through your web page. So if something is decorative, best to leave a blank alt tag. Now I stress blank, not no alt tag. And if you're using the CK editor, it's going to do this for you. But which is the editor that comes with Sakai 2.9 and later. If you have no alt tag at all, most screen readers use the file name of that image. So logo.jpg is what it will announce out, or JPG. But if you just leave it blank, it'll move on right through it. So interesting element there about creating content. And then the keyboard layout and trying to deal with complexity is another part where the CLE is trying to do some work for you. Yeah. Sakai has some global access keys. That is intended to help people who are using assistive input devices or something like a screen reader where they can't use a mouse to directly choose focus. So having an access key makes that much more useful to them because it prevents, for specific content, prevents them from having to start from top left of the page and move down to what we all know in the CLE is the main area, the content area. That's where you want to go to in almost every instance where you load a Sakai page. Without these access keys, if you skip straight to content or skip to the list on the left, some of the screen readers have to read through all those tabs across the top, your institutional information, all that, to get to the actual content every time a page loads. The access keys are very helpful for that. And even the skip to work sites can be a useful keystroke for anyone that's trying to navigate through the Sakai CLE. So, yeah.
How do people find out about these?
It's in the Sakai help. Under accessibility in 2.9 and earlier, it's the only document under accessibility.
It's kind of like when someone who can't see sits down, Sakai.
Yeah.
They're not going to know to go to the help to find out what.
If you want a best practice, if you have your accessibility navigation in your footer, would be a good place to find that. Label accessibility information in the link, because another very common practice someone using a screen reader is to press the hotkey to get a list of all the links on the page. So if you have a link called accessibility information, alphabetically sorted, it's going to be up there pretty high, and most screen reader users and other assistive technologies will know that's a good spot to go to. And you can cut and paste what's in Sakai Help and drop it right there, and that would be great for that person.
Access keys.
So access keys are hotkeys that the browser and the web page have worked out for specific content. So there's a modifier key, Alt Command, Apple key in some cases, that's specific to the browsers, but common after that. And then there are some standards for the actual letters that would be used with that. The Sakai kind of uses a template set up by the BBC. So there's sort of some commonality, but it does vary site to site. So access keys let you jump straight to some content. I'm going to show you an example because that's probably the best way to explain it. So here is Sakai 10 with some access keys. And the Chrome box screen reader going. And I just skip right past the
Full gateway, welcome now. Help the message of the day begins in content view. Tools, feed, acknowledge, view account, asterisk you. First, last name, edit, first, T, left, even, asterisk, create account, Sakai/run, welcome, alert. This very brief tutorial presents basic information about the features and layout of Sakai. It will run once when you first log into Sakai. You click to dismiss. Tutorial. Alert. Tutorial. You can go back to this tutorial by clicking the tutorial link in this drop-down. Tutorial. Click to dismiss. Button. Click to dismiss. Button. Content info list. Jump to tools list. Jump to site list. Log out. Link. Tools list begins here. Head. Tools list begins here. Navigation list. Membership. Link list. Membership.
There you go.
Sir, please.
So that's an example of Chromebox, which is the free screen reader that you can get for Chrome as an extension. Google provides it. It's not as full-featured as the industry standard JAWS. And JAWS, you could say like Windows 98 had this role at one point of it's the one that everyone is using, thus it dictates the experience that's most important. But Chromebox is useful and it's free, easy to get a demo, works on the Mac. There's built-in screen reader for the Mac as well. But that gives you a chance, at no cost, to experience what Sakai could be like for someone navigating without vision, without the ability to perceive what's on the page visually. They'll have Chromebox on. It's also using a keyboard to navigate through the interface there. So using the Tab key, Chromebox also has some keys to modify your direction keys and scroll up and down and move through content. So again, someone using an assistive device, this is the kind of experience they would have. You may have noticed there's some extra content at the top left there. This is new in Sakai 2.91 and later that gives people experiencing the site, so primarily students, some hints on jumping to content, jumping to the worksite list, those access keys that I mentioned. Because again, students aren't going to innately know what the hotkey is for a specific site. So having that in that list as you move through gives them a prompt. And it's not there visually, so only when you tab through the link, so hitting the Tab key, Shift Tab to go backwards, it's universal across browsers, will take you through all the links and form items. That shows the students, those are the user, that hint for moving to content. So that's a small example of what using Chromebox, a screen reader, would look like in Sakai 10. I have some links and some recommendations for other screen reader simulators and free screen readers at the end. And I thought there was a full screen option here, but let's. Okay. So content in Sakai is currently created with CKEditor versus the CKEditor, which are the open source projects that have been brought into Sakai to make that rich content, the HTML text it's making for you. CKEditor was an open source editor that was not as great with accessible content. CKEditor is much better. It's a separate project from Sakai that Sakai adopts. Many open source projects adopt it. They do have a real commitment to accessible content and making an accessible tool. It's a big challenge as well, but they do a good job. So there's the CKEditor if you're unfamiliar. So we, as an accessibility working group, authored a guideline for creating accessible content that we'll be shipping with Sakai 10 and is in the Screen Steps Live interface. So I'm going to go through a lot of this right now, but just to prove that it's my presentation is not the sole or original source of this information. Talks about adding images, how alt tags can be added, choices of headings, etc. That will ship in Sakai 10. It's entirely applicable to 2.9, and if you're using 2.8 and turned on CKEditor, it's applicable to that as well. So if you want to chase on that link and somehow backport to your organization, that's an option. As far as creating content, the kind of information it recommends, alt tags, simple image, or to give it a simple meaning of the image, complex image. You can add a paragraph inside that alt tag. If it's decorative, don't write anything, and that's better than having just "it's our logo" in And that screen reader example, I think, explains the cacophony of sound a screen reader experience kind of is. So the less meaningless information you can put in that cacophony, the better. Yeah.
A few minutes ago, you said if it was a decorative image, you should put an empty alt tag.
Yes.
No.
No, yeah, no alt tag empty, sorry. I should say empty there, you're right. I'll update my slide to correctly identify that. No alt tag from an experience, but a technical level, you're right, empty. Using semantically helpful elements. So, screen readers and other system technologies give the user some help as far as navigating content by interpreting lists as lists and giving options to jump to the start, the end, the middle, skip by 10, etc. Again, very useful if you have to access that information in this long linear stream. So when you make a list, please make sure you tag that in the editor as a list. So to make it bolded, make it numbered. If you start typing 1 period space, 2 period space, you have a bunch of numbers in a row. That's not necessarily a list as far as the HTML level is concerned. And if the HTML knows it's a list, then you've given the reader that much more help. It's going to be better to cut and paste into something else. Those robustness, all that improves. So if you can use items like lists, and especially numbered lists, from the toolbar in CKEditor, you're making a huge improvement on the everyday content inside Sakai. That's the kind of stuff, because it's a user-authored content, that the tool will never be able to make more accessible for an author. We need authors to consider this when they create the content. Paragraphs. Paragraphs are better than simple new lines. So there's 2 tags, P and a BR. Not that important, but if you are hitting return in the CKEditor, you're getting a full paragraph. If you're hitting shift return, you get a single line. Both are appropriate, just know when you're making that decision. Inline styles. So when you do cited work or inline quotation, if you can use the block quote option there, you're going to help someone learn more meaning from that than just tabbing it over one. There are options for marking up when it's code that's relevant to you. So on the page, code from someplace else, and pre-formatted text, and insert and deleted text. If you use the strike through, it has more meaning to the screen reader than writing deleted at either end or something like that. Color and position. Do not use color or spatial position to convey information. So if you are if the student being asked to replace the following words in the paragraph that are colored red, a student that can't maybe colorblind or is using assistive software won't know what's red. So if you can indicate that otherwise, italics is one way, or some other convention you can create for your own document, that would be more useful to some students than simple color. Conveying information through color location alone is not very robust as far as all those different ways individuals can perceive things. And ensure color contrast is strong enough for readers to perceive, to perceive. The color contrast is one of those things that can be computer defined, the ratio of 1 to 21 and the way the color spectrum works. That is an issue that I think, as we have an aging population, becomes more and more important. Color contrast is something that we can all consider in how we create content, and I think we can all think of someone that a low contrast scenario would be hard for them. Not whoever our archetype is an accessibility user. And I'll just say the Apereo app, Apereo 2014 app for your phone, has poor color contrast. And I think it's a challenge for everyone that uses it, not just people with accessibility issues. Using tables. So when you set up a table, inside CKEditor and Sakai or other ways, there are options to define actual headers versus just having any old table data. When you define a header, you give a screen reader or other assistive device that much more information to help someone navigate it. If you can think of a 12 by 12 table and some kind of linear or otherwise less perceivable interface to it, tables can be very, very confusing. So the more information you can throw in there for the screen reader to present to them, headings, for example, the more useful that can be. So if your person using assistive technology has to count over columns and count down to learn something about the periodic table or whatever, they are going to learn more about how many rows and columns are on your table than what you're trying to teach them. You can put in some headings about what each row is. The assistive software will hopefully tell them that they're in the neutron table or row, they're in the electron row, et cetera, versus having to tell them you're in row 5, row 6. You can also add a summary to a table. So if you can add a summary to a table that says a periodic scale in the summary, when the assistive technology gets to that table, it will table, summary, periodic table. Then a person using assistive technology can't see it, may then decide, I know this, I'm going to skip right past here. Versus for others, it may be there for reference. By putting a summary in, you give them that signal to some of the assistive devices that they don't have to get all the way down to Chromium to find out this is a periodic table. They can just start off with, okay, it's a periodic table, I'll move on. And almost never for layout. I would say never use a table for layout. It is acceptable under WCAG in certain cases, but you want to almost never use a table for layout. Tabular data is what a table is designed for, not breaking text into 2 columns. So if you can avoid it for that, then you're making that much more of a robust document. Questions so far? Pardon my typos.
You say almost never use a table for layout, but given some of the options and things like the stuff, that is one of the only ways.
Sorry, what tool?
The only way in some of the old tools to make things actually work well in a learning experience is to actually insert a table into those tools, or else you end up with content that is, just say, not very usable for both the sighted reader and somebody with visual issues. So what are your almost never suggestions? What is okay?
So if you are the kind of person that would know how to put in inline styles into the actual HTML code, then you can get around that, with relative ease. That's one of those parts of this challenge that can be tough for someone who doesn't have HTML knowledge to do. So that's why I say almost never, and why I acknowledge that this isn't a simple fix. But if you can use inline CSS style, that's one way to achieve that. If you can think of some way to make that a little more logically linear, then it's a general idea. But I acknowledge that not only are there old tools where that's challenging and difficult, there are old tools that don't know they should be using the CKEditor and just bring up the old FCKEditor because they don't know any better. That's another challenge we're trying to work on. We think we've got it for Sakai 10. But we did this work in 2.9 to get CK as a default, and then it shipped, and we found out that random tools, profile, for example, not to pick on it, would bring up the old CKEditor, or FCKEditor, pardon me, the one that we didn't choose just because something wasn't set quite right. So hopefully I'll evolve away too.
We just wrote 3 CKEditor templates, with the top of CKEditor instead of templates, to do like a 2-column layout and a grid layout. It was really easy, really easy. And I will contribute back if that would be.
That'd be great. Our own institution, we've been looking at doing those templates as well, never got around to it. So it's easy?
Yeah.
Great to hear.
Yeah.
All right. I'm running out of time, so I don't want to dwell too much on this. One way to get a sense of if your content is making sense, there is an option in some implementations of the CKEditor. This is kind of institutional. What we set up? Are we using ANI Sakai? Those kinds of situations. But show blocks lets you see the block layout of the HTML and outlines it inside the CKEditor. you can get a lot of insight as to if this is a well-formatted logical document that way. If you know what you're looking at, you can view source. And one other tip I'll throw along there, anyone familiar with MathJax? So anyone working in science, technology, and engineering, mathematics might know MathJax is a way to present scientific notation on the web in a way it's very high fidelity and is accessible. The current practice for putting math formula in Sakai right now is an inaccessible tool called fmath because it uses Flash. It makes inaccessible formulas because they're pictures of formulas. Math notation on the web is kind of like a bleeding edge of accessibility. It's a tough problem to solve. MathJax is a great presentation tool for showing formula on the web, but it's not an author. So you can't make formulas in it. You have to make them in MathML or LaTeX. I know our own faculty, like, they don't want to learn anything other than LaTeX, but I know that's a cultural thing. MathJax does a great job. When you have a picture of a math formula, you could do an alt tag of 6 exponent 7 divided by, etc. But man, the amount of information you'd have to store in your mind to think about that formula as an alt tag, where with MathJax, because each element can be inspected with screen reader, students can go back and forth to that formula, get a sense of what it is. So if you have a chance, go with MathJax. We're trying to get into Sakai moving forward, but not having a way to compose formula is tricky to replace fmath, which does let you compose. So we have done some audits and evaluations of Sakai. There was one across all LMSs. The most recent one for Sakai, Brock University commissioned it as part of our planning for our legal regime in Ontario, in our institution. But there was no broad-ranging audit of 2.9. There was a very small one, plus the one that Brock did. There won't be one for Sakai 10. We're taking a spot fixed model, but we're also not taking it lying down, trying to figure out a way to get a comprehensive audit of Sakai, because judging by the number of hands people who are in a legal requirement for having an accessible tool, we would like to be able to stamp WCAG2 on Sakai. Right now we can say we strive for it, but we can't say it. And then these are some of the tools that you might find for color contrast. For reviewing accessibility, the FAE, Firefox Accessibility Extension, very useful, been around for a long time. You can do some really simple reports on content in front of you. It will flag low color contrast. It will flag unclosed tags, various poor choices. A problem with automated testing is you get a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives. It's a good start. I like Fangs a lot, the Firefox Screen Reader emulator. It goes through the content and gives you a stream of text that would be something like what a screen reader would read out coming across that text. So it gets to table, now it says table, summary, and then cell, position 1, etc., etc. It gives you a sense of what someone might experience with screen reader. Chromebox is really nice because you can just get the extension, turn it on in Chrome, and immediately experience what a screen reader might sound like. Does sound like. Chromebox isn't the preferred screen reader by most people use assistive technology daily, but again, it only gets better, and it's ready to go in Chrome as soon as you want to add that extension. And Chrome's developer tools also includes accessibility audits. It's okay. I prefer the Firefox one myself. There's a whole bunch of public accessibility audit tools. With the LMS, though, the LMS is behind a login, so those web-based accessibility reviewing tools can't see our content inside the LMS. So some great free online accessibility auditing tools can't be used against Sakai content. So that's one challenge as far as reviewing Sakai for its accessibility in the content you create. Those free tools on the web can't get in. If you're using Windows, MVA Screen Reader is a free screen reader for Windows users. The Experian government's paid to develop, and others. So if you're interested in that, there it is. And then here's a link to even more resources in Sakai Confluence. If you can remember parts of those, that URL, I'm sure you can Google it. Whole bunch of tools for checking accessibility. So I've just got the 2 or 3 more minutes. Anyone want to share something that they might want to review as far as their content and their LMS going forward based on what they learned today? Yeah.
I just wanted to, one thing that I do once in a while is to try to figure out how to do alt tags for certain pictures and whatever, is I just put a white blank picture in the tag, into the HTML, and then I go and I look at it and like, and I look at the picture and I'm like, how am I supposed to describe this to that picture? And it makes it just so that I don't see the picture in the HTML page, so I have to think, how do I word what this picture is going to look like in that space?
Oh, I see.
Just so you get that, like, if you look at it blankly, how is that going to like convey the text to the person?
Okay.
Just as a tip.
I like that. And
Yeah. This is more of a question regarding the accessibility of using the CKEditor. Many of our faculty just generate everything in Microsoft Word and then end up pasting it. And I've noticed when that happens, they do have lists within Microsoft Word, but that does not translate into the pasting function of the CKEditor.
Yeah.
Do you have any?
other than using the specific CKEditor paste and word option, I don't have any good advice. If you can do something more when it arrives there to resolve it. There's so many different ways that Word can send the information that CKEditor can't be prepared to receive. Challenge. I think there might be a tip over there.
If you can get them to use just the plain text editor and not Word, because Word's going to put all that extra coding into it, which is going to cause all the issues. So if you can actually get them to take it, if they want to use Word to make it the way they think it needs to look, put it in the text editor and put it in, they'll have less problems.
For so many reasons, we all know that if you can do the formatting last at the HTML level, it'll look good as HTML. You just got to convince the faculty of that.
They all love Word, but text, the site text is really going to be the easiest way to make that transition.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right. That's right. You personally, and just getting them to do that at home.
You won't get them to do that.
Yeah.
That won't happen.
If I can leave you with anything, watch out for Sakai 10's new help documentation for creating content in CKEditor. And if you're not deploying Sakai 10 when it gets cut in the next couple of days, which would seem unlikely, then seek out that documentation. It applies back to 2.9 out of the box. It applies to 2.8 if you chose to run the CKEditor. You can distribute that amongst people making content in your version of Sakai. It'll be that much better. Thank you very much.